Or do we let the enemy twist it to tell us more and more, you're not worthy, you're not perfect, you are less than?
Hello there. You're listening to the Girl Talk Podcast. My name is Carol.
I'm Kelly.
Hey, I'm Trisha.
Glad you've joined us today. We're going to be talking about a heavy subject and something that you may not want to talk about, but as you know, we like those kind of topics, and so do you. We're going to be talking about shame today.
Oh, yeah,
let
that
me
is a
tell
heavy
you.
one.
Let me tell you what started this journey for me. I was studying about, I think it was a verse in Philippians where it says that Jesus went to the cross despising its shame.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the
Yes.
verse.
Yes.
He endured the cross, despising its shame. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame. And that little phrase just would not leave me alone. You ever read the Bible and you're like, despising its shame? Like, even what does that mean? And I got to do a little deep dive on that, and I had never heard anybody put it that way. Put it this way. The commentator said, do you realize that Jesus not only died for your sins, but he died for your shame? And I'm a person who's carried a fair amount of shame throughout my life for different things. But it struck a chord with me, and I was like, I've never heard anybody say Jesus died for your shame. They went on to say that Jesus died a shameful death on a cross, that he endured ridicule. That was a shameful crown that he wore, a shameful title that they nailed above his head, just all these things that were related to shame. He died for your shame, and I'd never even thought about that. So I was thinking about that. That was in my own personal study time. And then I heard a pastor preach a message on the prodigal son, and his topic was shame.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, Luke chapter 15.
Lord, what are you doing?
Yeah, right. God was really speaking to me about shame. And he was talking about Luke chapter 15, where we've all heard this story of the prodigal son, right? The father runs out to meet the son, and the pastor brought out in this message that it was shameful for a man to run in that culture. So
I don't think I knew that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it was because he had to pull up his robe.
Hike up his-
Yes. Okay.
And people would see his legs. And that
Oh,
just,
yeah.
children ran all the time. But when you were a man, you did not run. The father in the prodigal son story does a shameful act. He runs to take the shame off of the son who was returning after squandering his fortune on all sorts of things and coming back home, walking out, making a speech, says, Dad, I've sinned against you. But his father distracted the shame away from the son and ran out to meet him and took the shame upon himself. Also in that culture, that son returning home would have been basically cut off from the family. They would have busted a clay pot and said, you're no longer known with our family. And so the father ran out to take care of all that before the rest of the crowd could get to him and shame the son again. So how do we live a life free from shame? Is it possible? Let's talk about that for a minute. For me, I have noticed that in the places where I feel shame, most of the time, if I boil it down to the core, it's a wrong belief about God. Let me give you an
About
example.
God?
Yeah. Let me give you an example. So if you don't know this, I went through a divorce years ago. Didn't want to go through a divorce. Nobody ever does. And I have carried a fair amount of shame throughout my life because of that. Even now, it just seems to color everything that I because, you know, most people are there. You meet them and you're like, oh, are you married? That's the first question they ask for whatever reason. So I've carried around a fair amount of shame about that. When I boil that down, I'm like, why am I ashamed of that? Because I feel like I failed. Because I feel like I failed at marriage. Okay. Because I feel like marriage is a value giver. Like what you have to say if you're married is more valid than if you're single or divorced. And then I boil that on down, and it gets down to the fact that God doesn't love me because I'm divorced. Now, that is not true, and I know that kind of in my head, but I still carry around a fair amount of shame because of that. And most of the time I can boil it down. And I think that's where shame gets its power, is that we don't really think about why we feel ashamed. We just have that feeling, that overwhelming feeling that there's something wrong with us. And I think playing into that is the whole idea of divorce, because you have a fair amount of rejection with that, and you feel like, oh, well, look, this person divorced me because they're right. I'm a terrible person and nobody will ever, think that I have value, right? So it's just like a snowball rolling downhill. And that shame just becomes part of who you are.
Yeah. And, well, that's exactly what I was thinking when you were talking about that, is that it's become an identity. Like that your identity is tied up in your marital status.
Right.
And so your identity is not the identity that you have given yourself, that you have taken upon your own shoulders, is rejected divorcee. Not the identity that we have in Christ,
right.
Which is his loved bride. That you are the bride of Christ.
Right.
We are the bride of Christ. And so it's easy for us to take that shame. I take on the shame. My identity has become the heaviest person in the room. And true or not true, that should not be where I find my worth or my identity. But we tend to take that on and make that how we see ourselves and how we think other people see us, when it's really not true.
Yeah.
I don't ever look at you and the very first thing that pops in my head is divorced.
Yeah.
Like, in fact, if it pops in my head at all, it's usually way down the list.
Right.
There's so many other things that when I look at you that I think of before I think about your marital status. And I know that there are tons of things that people think about me before they think about, what pant size I wear.
Right.
Yes.
And so we have a tendency to think about that ourselves, put that on as our identity, and then the enemy feeds that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
because
the
he
truth.
knows where we've picked up that identity, and he just keeps feeding that into our head to make it worse and worse and worse, to get us further and further away from our identity being in Christ and being in a daughter of the King.
Yes, absolutely.
And culture feeds into that.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Oh, for sure. And, social media and all of those things, what we prioritize. But I think it is the area where we are the most insecure, that the area where we feel the most insecure about, that is where we feel that shame. And you're so right that is where the enemy picks and picks and picks. And one thing that I have been trying to dig into is the self-criticism that happens in my head.
Yeah.
And I think all of you all are thinking that too, which I hope you're not. but I tell myself that you are, and it's just a self-critical filter that we all think about. And of course, I never think. I just think how beautiful you are, and I think how wonderful you are, and how amazing. And so we don't
I think about how much joy you have, like how you are just a bouncing ball of joy and energy and fun. Yet never do I look at you and think, oh, you've got anxiety, you got the things going on in your head.
Yeah.
That's, again, if I think about that, it's way down here at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
It's the fun, joy, light
So
that you
why
bring.
is it that we do that? Why do you think we do that? Why do you think we project those feelings and those thoughts on other people?
I want to know because I want to change.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with our insecurities,
Thoughts.
that we have negative thoughts about ourselves. And so we know if we're thinking those things, then other people must be thinking those negative things too.
I think we're building a case.
Yes.
Sure.
And every thought builds more of a case. It's again that path through the woods. Every time you think it becomes easier to think it.
Yeah.
And when it's that self-critical thing, at least in my mind, it becomes easier to think it.
Yeah.
And our lives are built on our thoughts. And so what we're filling our heads with has such a direct emphasis on not only how we think, but how we act and what we believe.
And I think there's also a little bit of truth in the underlying piece of that. We know we are built knowing. We are created knowing that we are not perfect, that we are not whole. We have a Jesus-sized hole in us.
Yeah.
And so we do have this innate God-given desire to grow, to become more like Jesus, to search for holiness, to grow towards holiness, to grow towards perfection. And the flip side of that is that we know we're not perfect. We know that we are broken. We know that we don't live up to the standard set before us.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is how do we twist that? Do we twist it to make us hunger more to be Christ-like, hunger more to be holy, or do we let the enemy twist it to tell us more and more, you're not worthy, you're not perfect, you are less than, you are, you're never going to be like Jesus because you are not perfect.
Yeah. I think you bring out an interesting point. It's where do you take your hunger?
Sure.
Where do you go to fill your cup? Where do you go
scratch
to?
the itch.
Yeah. And those are places that can become idols, because you go to that long enough, it will become an idol. You know, it's where do you take your hunger?
Yeah.
And the idol then becomes the thing that promotes your shame, because when you're going to the God substitute, you're going to have shame because it's never going to give you.
Right.
And if you're putting all your chips in that, in that basket or whatever.
In that salsa.
I'm mixing all
You're
my...
putting all your chips in that salsa.
in the spicy salsa. But it is true. If you are putting all of the weight into that God substitute, you're going to have shame because it's never going to hold up.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it, too, is also how do we handle our failures? Because we are going to fail. And so when we fail, do we go, ooh, I'm closer to Jesus than I was before I started this process, or do we fall way, way back and say, I'm worthless, I'm never going to get there. I knew it. I knew I was going to fail from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just changing that perspective to say, I am closer to perfection than I was before. I'm closer to being like Jesus than I was before, even if I fail. Because I'm going to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whose voice are you listening to?
Yeah.
It's the enemy's voice is condemning. There's a lot of never. There's a lot of I told you so. There's a lot of hopelessness. And God's voice, when he draws us closer to him, is full of hope, is full of you have another chance, is full of come my way.
Yeah.
It's a very different feeling.
Just hearing you say that reminded me of the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were perfect and living in perfect harmony with Jesus, or with God. And that's when the enemy comes in, the serpent comes in and says, did God really say?
Come on.
Did God really say? No, when you eat from that tree, you're going to be like God. So that was their idol. That was what they wanted more than anything else. Wanted to be like God.
Yeah.
Be God.
Right. Yeah.
That doesn't work because we're humans.
Yeah.
We are failed human beings. So, is it possible to live free of shame? Sit with God with whatever it is that brings you shame, and know that he died for your shame. If that's a new concept for you, you're not alone, because me and Kelly were there at least. Maybe you too, TK. I think it's important for us to be honest with God with our shame. That's the only way. I heard Beth Moore say a long time ago, God only shines light where he's willing to heal. And so if this episode is like touching some of those places in your heart and you're like, ooh, yeah, shame is kind of where I live, God's shining light there because he wants to heal, and he wants to heal that part of you. So we'd love the opportunity to pray for you. If you want to get in touch, you can. You can email us at girltalk@thelightfm.org. You can check in on the Facebook page, or you can leave us a comment here on wherever you're listening to this podcast. Like, review it, share it with your friends. We would love for everybody to be able to live a life free of shame. And we'd love the opportunity to pray for you too. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time we gather around these microphones for the next Girl Talk podcast.